But first tonight, when you think of vampires, true crime might not necessarily come to mind. Vampires are fiction, mysterious creatures of the night who sleep in coffins and drain victims of their blood with sharp, pointy fangs. You've seen them in the movies. They've inspired generations of Halloween costumes and books, and of course, some of the best horror films of all time.
I am Dracula. Oh, it's really good to see you.
Welcome to my home.
It's Blade. It's the Daywalker.
Initiation's over, Michael. It's time to join the club.
Have you said your goodbyes to the light?
Oh man, Interview with the Vampire, that was a good one. Okay, but vampires aren't real, or are they? An upcoming Netflix documentary alleges that Dayton, Ohio is home to one of the largest covens of vampires in America. You heard me right, Dayton, Ohio. Who would have thought? The Netflix film titled Vampires in Gem City, it looks at the Dayton Coven's potential ties to the disappearance of a man who has not been seen since 1994. October 13th of that year, it was a Thursday, a roofer named George Phillip, his name was George Phillip Gall. He left the home he shared with his wife and infant daughter. It was around 11 o'clock at night. He got on a local bus, and he got off near a goth-themed nightclub called Asylum. The driver of the bus said Gall walked towards Asylum, and he was never, ever seen again. The bus driver was the last person to see him. Well, in 2002, Gall was declared dead by the state, but the case remained unsolved. Then in 2008, a retired Dayton police officer named David Williams made a shocking claim to a local newspaper. Williams said he went undercover at Asylum the same year Gall went missing, and there was a bartender who told him that Gall was used in a cult ritual upstairs and that he was actually beheaded. Now, the bartender says Gall's head was sold as a relic to an occultist right there in the club. Really shady stuff happening in that club. Supposedly, the rest of Gall's body was dumped in a storm sewer. Now, when Williams and other officers searched the sewer, there was no sign of Gall, but they did find occult markings. A study by a group called the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, we don't know, Atlanta Vampire Alliance, 2015 said 5,000 people in the U.S. actually identify as vampires, and some really do drink blood, but only from willing donors. You'll even find some of them showing off their fangs on TikTok. They're all over TikTok, apparently. And my next guest has witnessed the vampire culture firsthand. Now, if you're a fan of the show, we usually introduce Dr. Catherine Ramsland as a forensic psychologist, which she is, world-renowned, but she has also immersed herself in the past in the vampire cultures, especially in the 1990s, while she was following the case of a missing journalist. She was writing her book, Piercing the Darkness. She attended vampire parties and balls. She even had a set of fangs made for herself. And I am joined by Dr. Ramsland right now. And just in full disclosure, I was at a conference with Dr. Ramsland, and we went out for a drink, and we were talking about serial killers, because that is her expertise. And she started to tell me how she went underground with the vampires, which I found to be fascinating. And I did not realize, Dr. Ramsland, that you also even had, like, fangs made for the whole experience.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. I wanted to find out what happened to this missing woman, because I had done some writing with Anne Rice there were guides to her vampire universe. I wanted to go into this world. My literary agent thought I could get in, and I did. And I went to the parties. I went to meet people alone at night in various places. I went to a number of different events to find out what this subculture was about, hopefully to find this woman. I didn't find her, but I did find out a lot about the people and why they were so attracted to this subculture.
So why are they? I mean, is it more of like kind of a role play situation, or are these actual like vampires that actually drink each other's blood?
It's all of that. It was, at the time I was in it, it was a huge subculture, thousands, tens of thousands of people. The internet, there was no social media at the time. The internet had really just started. There were chat rooms, there were ways to connect. There were live action role playing games. Then people would travel from one city to another for weeks at a time, playing out their roles. And the attraction is different for different people. Some wanted to be vampires because they wanted that sense of power and transformation and supernatural, larger than life aura. Some wanted to be victims, some wanted to be vampire hunters. Some shapeshifters would get into this subculture. It overlapped with the goth subculture, so it was really quite rich.
Was there ever anything you saw that made you uncomfortable? Like, what was the craziest thing that you saw while you were pretending to be a vampire?
I think the blood sports was probably the craziest. Where people would cut themselves, scarification it was called, but they would just let blood run all over them. There was blood drinking in my presence. There were people who formed kind of families where they were safe. It was like a safe sex situation where their blood had been tested for any kind of diseases so that they knew that drinking from one another was safe. And they weren't really into the immortality idea of the vampire, like the mythical creature. It was, they had redefined the vampire from my sense of Dracula and Barnabas Collins and all of that. They had completely redefined the vampire to be what they wanted it to be and to work for them. And that was really kind of interesting.
So what do you know about this Dayton, Ohio situation? Because apparently there's this big Netflix documentary that's going to be coming out later this year that's already getting a lot of publicity. What have you heard about what's been going on in Ohio? Or when I guess it was decades ago, really.
It was decades ago,
yeah.
And I would have to say, bring evidence, because the vampire community back then and even now was not about human sacrifice. It was really about transformation, a sense of belonging for marginalized people. There are crimes committed, but they're rare for that community. And they're really more about the vampire metaphor, whereas a beheading is not part of the vampire metaphor. It's more, satanic or, some other kind of ritual. So I would suggest if this guy was actually murdered by these people, and I don't know that there's evidence that he was, had something to do with something else besides the vampires, because that really wasn't what that community was about.
I'm just thinking about some of the things that you yourself witnessed in terms of like the blood. I mean, is it, if two people are willing, is it illegal to do that, to be a vampire?
It's legal to voluntarily share blood with other people, but there were people like John Crutchley comes to mind, where he would abduct women, hold them captive, and drink their blood. And that is illegal.
Yeah, of course.
That clearly he's crossing a line there. So it depends on what they're doing with it and whether the people involved are doing this voluntarily.
Listen, Dr. Ramsland, as the world's preeminent expert on serial killers, I have a very hard time envisioning you with the fangs and, chilling with the vampires, but it's fascinating, and I didn't realize you wrote a book on it. So thank you for sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it.